everyone, and welcome to Disability Representation in Fiction, and a general welcome to the WriteHive 2024 conference. Hello, my name is Basil. My pronouns are he, they, they, them is also fine, and I will be the moderator of this panel. Today, we have a wonderful interstellar array of panelists here to discuss this topic, and we will go ahead and kick it off with Kate Foster.
Hi, so my pronouns are she, her. I am a children's author. I live in Australia, originally from the UK, and I write books that star autistic children being absolutely awesome and the heroes of their own stories.
Hello, I'm Nicole, she, they. I write books that are generally queer and disabled, and that's pretty much it about me.
I am Tyler Wittkofsky, he, him. I am a multi-genre author and a indie publisher. I also am a marketing and communications professional by trade. All of my work has some kind of representation for mental illness, mental health, and making sure that we are bringing awareness to that.
My name is Lara Ameen. My pronouns are she, they, but I mostly use she, her. I write novels and novellas, short stories, and TV drama pilots with queer disabled characters and sometimes Egyptian characters. And my stories usually center around mental health representation, physical disability representation, ACE representation, all kinds of representation around disability. And I have a PhD in disability studies, and I utilize that to also to write disabled characters. And I have a story in the young adult anthology, Being Ace, about a queer disabled girl who has 48 hours to save her girlfriend from an anonymous enemy, and it's a YA thriller short story. Thank you.
I've been wanting to read that anthology for a bit, so I'm extra excited to read it now.
Yes, that I love thrillers. I love reading thrillers. You'd think it would translate also to media, but very rarely. But so we have also a fun collection of questions for all of you panelists. So let's go ahead and kick it off with so here is what I find to be a really tantalizing and interesting question for all of the panelists. What are the common misconceptions about disability representation? And panelists, feel free to jump in whenever the mood and whatever the spirit prompts you, as they say in the South.
So I'm happy to kick this one off, and I guess because we've got such a wonderful range of disabilities present, I'll come at it from sort of maybe an autistic angle. And I mean, you know, the classic misconceptions, stereotypes, or cliched characters. There's so many. But yes, when it comes to autistic people, you know, there is still this belief that we are all amazing at mathematics, that we are all have some incredible skill, that we're all geniuses, that we don't have any empathy, etc., etc. It's so sad to see these misconceptions and these conversations still being had, and really so much of it still dates back to the days of Rain Man, unfortunately, which I know, you know, in its day was lauded as representation that we didn't have before, but I think really, you know, we need to move on and offer everybody the spectrum that autism is.
I think that's a great point, Kate. That was really spot on. For me, with mental illness, a lot of people make that the basis of their villain. And whenever you're doing that, you're stigmatizing the different disorders. So, for example, I have bipolar disorder and BPD, and of those two, I see a lot in fiction, where there is a villain who is suffering from these disorders, and they're trying to make it out like this is why they are like this. And that's a lot of that. It comes from the stigma that we see in America with a lot of the shootings that we have and people blaming it on mental illness and not the guns instead of, or not the evil people. So being able to differentiate between that. And then I would also say there are times where I've heard of shows that use bipolar disorder and other disorders like that as a superpower. And I think it's really hard to use it as a superpower because it's really not a superpower, and it's something that we do struggle with, but we overcome it and we fight our battles. And I think that's something that as a writer I have to remember, is that it can't be the basis of the story. It needs to be a supplement to the story.
I really like what you said about that it's not a superpower, and also it doesn't make us villains. Like I saw someone the other day talking about how it's not that neurodivergence makes you smarter or makes you worse or whatever, but it's just a different operating system. Like it's like Android versus iPhone. And then there were a whole bunch of discussions in the comments of the video about which one neurodivergent people would be, but I digress. I think that a common misconception that people have about disability stories are just that they have to be either super depressing or inspirational, right? Like they either have to die in the end or they have to like get over their disability. And one book that I think countered this narrative really well is Sick Kids in Love by Hannah Moskowitz. If anyone's read it, the main character has arthritis, and she falls in love with someone that she meets at her infusions, and really big on the front cover, it says, and part of the reason I read the book in the first place, it says, they don't die in this one. So that was really exciting for me as a disabled person to go, oh, this person has my disability, and also she's just a person, right? Like she's not anyone's inspiration, and she's not here for trauma porn, which was really exciting for me.
Yeah, I think all of those are really valid points too. And I think that like some common misconceptions would be like when I teach, I'll probably mention this later, but I teach classes on writing disabled characters and workshops. And when I teach, I always go through like the main, media stereotypes are like victim, hero, and villain, but like in a negative way. So when you see that they're the hero, they're overcoming their disability, right? And like you don't have to have the main character or a side character overcome their disability to be a hero or something. Or the villain is like, they have like a facial deformity or they have like mental illness and it's in a negative way. So I think that like those are like misconceptions. Or like I keep the one I keep coming back to is like when you look at the TV show Lost and you look at the John Locke character, and they go into he comes in a wheelchair and then he comes out and he's like not disabled. Or you look at fantasy and they'll go into like a fantasy world and suddenly they're not disabled. And it's like, why? Like in fantasy or horror or speculative stories, the disability can be used as something that could help the character or help them navigate or help them learn to adapt. And I think a common misconceptions would be like, oh, if they go into a fantasy world or a sci-fi world or whatever, like they have to be cured or they have to, that disability is some kind of negative hindrance when it doesn't have to be.
I think that's a really great point. And I think one of the things, I know that we probably will discuss it with other questions, but the thing that comes up so much in books with disabled representation is our agency is taken away from us. And it's given to side characters, or our presence in a book is only there so we can teach everybody this wonderful life lesson of kindness and acceptance. And so yeah, I think that's such an important point at the moment, I think, that you've made there, Lara. Absolutely.
I think also going specifically into like sci-fi and fantasy, there's one book that I really want to point out, and it's the series name is the Cosima Saga. It's a trilogy, and the main character has OCD and falls into this fantasy world that she created herself. And so much of the story is based around like her OCD and her rituals and the creation of this world as a way for her to cope. And I think that that's a really good example of never in the story does she, I haven't read the third one, but never in the story is is she looking for like a way to get rid of her OCD in this fantasy world? It's just part of who she is, and she struggles with it, and also it's not something she needs to get rid of. So there are good examples out there, but I also agree that most of the time, we're really hard pressed to find those good examples. So when they do happen, I want to shout them out extra.
Absolutely. I think we've all been there in some way or form, reading media that does not reflect our own lived experiences. Also, hi, every time I do one of these recordings, I always forget to mention my own marginalizations. I too am neurodivergent, disabled, and autistic, you know. Do I remember to mention that when I do these kind of things? No, but now everyone knows again. So yay. Um, it's so much fun. Um, I am saying that like non-sarcastically, the joys of being autistic and having a flat affect. Um, but so on that train of thought, talking about how depictions have been, there are excellent depictions, but there are also harmful depictions, or even just like depictions where it's like I can kind of see where you're going, but you didn't quite make it there. Um, what challenges are faced in the industry with disability in fiction?
I think as a publisher, one of the challenges that I've seen is people who have not run their books through sensitivity readers, who have not maybe not lived the experiences or not doesn't know anybody who's lived the experience. Research is key for all kinds of writing, but making sure that you're accurately representing the person. I think too many people are trying to rely on the disability to get their story by instead of their storytelling to get the actual story out there.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. That I'm autistic, have OCD, but I use for every single one of my books. I use a sensitivity reader. Like even for me, I don't know everybody's life and experiences, and I don't know if the language I'm using is sometimes offensive to the wider community. I do my research, I'm embedded a lot in the autistic community, but there's cultural things that affect how we talk as well, and from country to country and community to community. So I mean, I wouldn't even dream of not having sensitivity readers read my work and tell me what I'm doing wrong. But I have a lot to say on this topic, and I know that it's kind of change can't happen overnight, but I think the problem goes right to the top, and I think there needs to be just a mass change at the top, within publishers. I think there needs to be far more people being employed as editors, as marketing, promotion, education, whatever departments within publishers, where disabled people are employed, and if that can't happen immediately, there needs to be actual training where every staff member is sent to learn about sensitivity reading, and to be put in touch with that network to understand our perspectives and listen to our voices and why these things are important. And I am going to stop talking at that point because I do get very frustrated with this topic, so I will hand over at this point to someone else.
I think what you said about the change needing to come from the top is really on point. I think at this point, since sorry, I'm neurodivergent, recommuting what I'm saying in my brain, but I think that publishers, we have reached the point where major publishing houses, the big five, people that the publishing houses that can afford it, need to hire sensitivity readers. And that can't all fall on the author, right? Because they're expensive, and they're important. Both things are true. So I think that we've reached the point where publishers need to acknowledge how important that is. And I've worked with a lot of indie publishers that acknowledge how important that is. And I'm happy to front the cost for myself when I'm working with an indie press that doesn't have as much money. But I do think that that's something that needs to be a priority with the big five. I think that also with the publishing industry in disability fiction, that we need we need more disability fiction, right? I think that a lot of publishers, especially the bigger publishers, have their quota that they fill. And they say, well, we've published a disability book and we can't publish too many because that's depressing, or we need a different type of diversity, not thinking about how there are disabled people of different races and genders and lived experiences. And so we get the one disability book about like a young white kid in suburbia, and then that's it. So I think we need just more books about disability. And I think that that's something that publishers need to be more open to as well.
And I think that's such a good point, in that how many people have you spoken to, not everybody on this panel, who are disabled and have been rejected on the basis that the publisher already has, I already have a character, book coming out with a character who's autistic. And like, that's shocking that you've said that. And that goes on to like, us publishers not needing just the sensitivity and the disability representation and training for the editors. It needs to go right through to the marketing team. I mean, I don't know if you were, obviously because you're all in America, I don't know if you were following on with the recent hoo-ha with the Roald Dahl books, and that there's new books being written by some celebrities, so let's not even go down that path. And so many people signed off on on this video the promotional video. So many people signed off on this, saying that someone having a glass eye is disgusting, and how many people saw that, discussed that, watched that video, and still it made it to being shared to the wider public. Did nobody within that publishing house, within all of those departments, step forward and say, oh gosh, maybe a little insensitive, shall we sit down and have a little chit chat about this? Absolutely diabolical.
I think it's interesting because I am a sensitivity reader. I've been doing sensitivity reading for 5 years now, and I've been really lucky to get to work on some amazing projects, and most of the sensitivity reading I've done has been around disability representation or ableist language. I'll pop into an author's inbox and be like, hey, like, can I be a sensitivity reader for your book, please? Like, I would love to. I love to, get paid to read books, but I think it also goes beyond sensitivity reading in that, disabled people have to be employed in higher positions as editors and in other, positions as well. And it comes to a matter of like, if you have one disability book, why not have more? Because there are so many different disabilities. Like, I'm physically disabled, I use a wheelchair, but I have invisible disabilities too. And like, there are so many disabilities and disability types and different types of neurodivergence and mental illness and all those kinds of things. And there's so many nuances. And I feel like if people were employed in like the higher level positions like editors and different things and that had those disabilities, they would be acquiring more books that have, neurodivergent characters or physically disabled characters. And I do think sensitivity reading is great. I mean, like I said, I've been doing it for 5 years, but I don't think everything should fall on the sensitivity reader as well. I think that there should be research done on the point of view of, on behalf of the author and the editor and other people involved in the work. But I think that a sensitivity reader for any marginalization, and especially with disability, should be like, that should be a consideration in the sense of like, oh, I see, not just like, oh, there's a disabled character in my book, but like, even like I said before, for like ableist language, like if I could read more books just for ableist language alone, like most books have ableist language in them because people just don't know that like that's a thing. So yes, it is on the sensitivity reader also, but I think it should also be on the authors and the editors and people around who are marketing to like learn about not just sensitivity, but to learn about what it takes to be disabled, how to accommodate disabled authors and editors, and how to accommodate different people and how they learn and what they do, because like that's important too. So
Yeah, for sure. I do want also to acknowledge that the people that currently work in publishing who are disabled are doing amazing work, right? So my agent, I got recently, which is very cool. But her name is Danielle Hunter, and if y'all have the chance to ever work with her, you should. She's amazing. She is disabled, and we've talked a lot about in the manuscript that I'm querying now, my own experiences with using assist devices and trying to kind of normalize that in my brain with my various physical disabilities. And she's just been so great to work with, and also so protective of me when we started sharing things with editors. And so the people that are doing that work, there aren't a lot of us yet, but there are definitely more than there used to be. And it's hard, and they're doing a really good job.
Yeah, and sorry, Tyler, you're. I'm just going to very quickly add so that you can speak. My apologies. That that is so important from the perspectives of looking after the authors as well, not just looking at our characters in our books, also us understanding, the challenges that we go through and daily, and sympathizing, but going beyond that and accommodating and giving us the information that we need, and not making us feel like every email we send is a burden, or is, oh gosh, they're in my inbox again, what do they need now? It's that creating a safe space, I think, for us as creators as well, not just authors, obviously illustrators as well. Yeah, creating that family acceptance is just beyond important.
That's one thing we do at Tea with Coffee Media is we hire a lot of people with disabilities, including our vice president of marketing, operations, editor-in-chief. Many of our authors have disabilities, and we do disability trainings and mental health trainings to give people, our authors, to give our staff, the opportunity to learn and give them these resources and these tools to add to their tool belt. So even if they leave us one day, they can still take those tools that they learned and that sensitivity that they learned and apply it to future jobs, to future publishing industries, and maybe make a wave. Maybe we're going to make a change. That's what it's, I think Kate mentioned it earlier. It's all about change. We need to, it starts from the top. And that was why I got into the publishing industry, was to make that change, to be the change, like Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to give also just a brief shout out to all of us sensitivity readers and consultants. We rock. We're awesome. Yes. Special shout out to the community that I'm in on Discord. Y'all know who you are. I just winked, but then I realized because of the coding on my glasses, no one could see it. Yay. Over exaggerated wink. There we go. For all my homies in that server. So let's move to they've all been fun questions, but I always love asking these questions in panels, because it gives me new things to read. So what are some examples of positive representation you've encountered? There's also a second question, though I do think we've touched on this a little bit. What are ways to ensure representation is positive? And we definitely already discussed sensitivity readers, I almost said dismantling, but restructuring and reforming the publishing industry and a few other ways. So feel free to only answer the first question, the second question, both.
I will say one of the best representations, positive representations I've seen was Can Love Ladies Indifferent. It is about a young woman with autism who goes through heartbreak, and it's really well represented and shows her struggles, but also how positive, she makes things and she's able to do things. It's a little bit of a sci-fi book. There's some experimental drugs in there and experiments. So, going back to what we were talking about earlier in the sci-fi realm, we were able to incorporate that and still she was able to incorporate that and still be positive with it. I think it's really hard to remember to be positive, because especially as somebody with a mental illness, we go through times where our minds are telling us that we aren't this great writer, that we aren't this great person. And that kind of leaks into our writing sometimes while we're going through those depressive stages, while we're going through those manic stages, whatever it may be. And being able to, ground yourself using things like sensory therapy to remember, I am capable. I'm capable of more than my mental illness says I am.
Yeah, to follow on from that, I point everybody again from the autistic perspective and neurodivergent perspective. I always point everyone towards a website which is called the Autism Books by Autistic Authors Project. I think that's right. But I think the website is Autistic Books by Autistic Authors, and it's just a database of books written by autistic people, and there are some reviews on there. The owner of the website, the curator of these books, openly says she hasn't read them all, but it's such a great place to go to find those books which have positive, balanced representation, because like you said, Tyler, that there needs to be a balance. You can't go from having the books which are just about trauma and the despair of being disabled, but you also need you can't just go to incredibly positive books which just totally dismiss the disability and how it affects lives. So there does need to be that balance of, it's really, really hard, but actually look, if you create this accommodation, or if you listen to our needs and what we want, look how easy it is for everybody to be accepted. But I have just so many books to recommend, and so I'd probably be talking now for about half an hour just about each individual book. But yes, if you go to this website, there is just, for autism and neurodivergent representation, there's just so many books to choose from, and a book with a variety of disabilities is Cosima Fortune Steals a Star. I think that's what it is. It's a series by Lara Noakes, I believe. She's an English author, and it is just amazing. It's a children's book about set in historical about a group of kids who are put into a home because of their disabilities. They're taken away from their parents or left there, as it unfortunately was many years ago. But these kids are amazing. They go on this amazing adventure and this mystery to solve. And yes, their disabilities are present, and they can be difficult for the characters to, deal with in like just regular experiences, but also they come in quite handy at the same time, as we all know it can be the case perhaps with many of us. So and I'll stop because I could just start talking about millions of books now.
I also just always have book recommendations, and if you go on my Goodreads, I have a whole shelf of Spoonie books, so that I have to narrow it down to one or two, which is very difficult for me. But I would say One for All by Lily Lainoff is one that I really want to mention. The main character has POTS, and I think that one way that the representation in that is really positive is that even though it's historical fiction, it's a feminist Three Musketeers retelling. We see a lot of the symptoms that are present in Tanya's body, the main character. And so even though she never says, I have POTS, because POTS wasn't a diagnosis in that time period, we see a lot of what's happening. And it's not positive in the sense that, she's happy all the time, but positive in the sense that it's real, and it's a real depiction of who she is and what POTS is like. The author also, it's No Voices book, so the author also has POTS. And then another one I really want to mention is Breathe and Count Back from 10 by Natalia Sylvester. So we learn on the first page very early on that the main character has hip dysplasia. And I think that is really helpful also in that she has symptoms that are associated with it. She talks about the pain. She talks about the way people stare at her when she's limping, because it's different, and people don't know not to stare for some reason. But also she just has a lot of feelings about it, and we really get kind of a deep dive into what that means for this teenage girl And I think, again, it's not necessarily positive in the like, she's all happy all the time, but it's really positive in the like, it is really cool as a disabled person, especially to see another disabled person go through that kind of disability acceptance arc and sometimes not be happy about it, right? Sometimes be like, it really sucks that I'm going to spend my entire life in pain. But that's real. And that's what she's going through. So I would say those two are the ones I want to shout out for now.
I also have a lot of disability like recommend. I was also gonna shout out One for All. I figured it's either me or Nicole who was gonna say One for All because Lily's my critique partner. So I did a lot of reading of the book before it was a published book. But oh gosh, so many recommendations, so many good ones too. And Breathe and Count Back from 10 is also a really good recommendation. I would also recommend Where You See Yourself by Claire Forrest. Is about a girl with cerebral palsy, and I have cerebral palsy, so that's why I'm shouting it out. And she also talks about having clonus, which is like associated with CP. And as someone who's like been dealing with clonus recently, it was really interesting to read. She also has hyperacusis, which is a sensory disability, but it's not stated as hyperacusis because it's stated as a startle reflex. It's called hyperacusis. That's the technical term, but very, very common with CP and autism. It's a sensory disability, but it's basically about a disabled girl who is trying to figure out like where she wants to go to college. And it's really, really interesting in how like she is like the only girl in a wheelchair in her, like and how things aren't accessible and stuff. And it really spoke to me. I wish I had that as a 18-year-old college freshman. Oh my gosh. And I don't want to spoil it, but I don't want to spoil where she ends up, but she ends up going to my undergrad. So so that was fun to read and very relatable, and I cried. What else can I recommend? Also, other cerebral palsy recommendations are Love Letters for Joy by Melissa C. and You, Me, and Our Heartstrings. They have a different representation of CP, but it's done really, really well. And I really enjoyed it. I could go on with so many more recommendations. I think I'm going to shout out one more because people were saying they like thrillers. The one by, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's by Dana Mele, and it's a YA thriller, and I'm blanking out on the name, but it's about it has PTSD and like mental health representation, and it's really, really well done. I cannot remember the name of it. I am so sorry. I'm like blanking. I have a whole list of YA novels by disabled authors, and my brain is not braining. It's fine. But that one's really, really good. And yeah, there's so many now. There's so many positive representation. There's like so much more positive representation. So those are a few.
We're going to have to exchange lists at some point because I too am obsessed with Claire Forrest and Melissa C. So Forrester and Melissa C. Melissa C. every once in a while will comment on like one of my TikToks, and I'm like, you're too cool for this. Why are you here? Why are you on my TikTok? You're awesome. So I definitely I read the first of her books, and I'm really looking forward to reading the second one, which also has a lot of ace reps. So
yeah,
isn't it funny how? Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I can see we're all really excited about this. Isn't it funny how, yeah, you look up to these people who have paved the way and it's like, and then they talk to you and you're like, oh my gosh. I'm like that with Sally J. Pla. Oh my gosh, her books are just extraordinary. And so is she. And so, yeah, whenever, she talks to me on the socials, it's like, what are you doing? Like, do you know that I'm just like no one? So yeah, I'm totally there with you.
Can I mention one more for disability? Right, it's not a book though. But I wanted to shout this out because I am a screenwriter, and a lot of the or I hate even saying the word positive. I like saying like authentic representation. It's like, what does positive mean? But something for authentic representation that I really love that's a media example. So we see a lot of this in TV comedies. We don't see enough as much of it in drama, especially in like sci-fi, fantasy, and horror drama. And I am a TV drama writer, so like that's my niche. So one that's done it really well is the TV series Raising Dion on Netflix. Is about a black boy with superpowers, and he has asthma, but he has a friend who's a little girl named Esperanza. Well, she's not little anymore. They're like 10, 12 years old, but she uses a wheelchair and she has a osteogenesis imperfecta. But it's a sci-fi drama about like superpowers, and it's really cool and really well done. So I would recommend Raising Dion for a media example. If you haven't seen it, really, really well done.
Tyler, did you have anything to add on those points?
No, I was going to agree with Lara. I think positive representation, we need to remember, does not mean happy go lucky all the time. And I think we've touched on that a couple times, but it means accurate and authentic, and being able to show the good, bad, and the ugly, and being able to bring awareness for it, because I think that's part of the reason that a lot of us write with for disabilities, is to bring awareness and show people that even though you have these disabilities, you're still a normal person. You know, well, we're not, nobody's normal. So I wouldn't even say that. We're all a little strange on the inside. And that's okay. You know, we're meant to be like that. If we were all the same, if we were all normal, then what fun would the world be? So um, being able to embrace who you are and help other people accept who they are as well is something that's really important with the authenticity of this.
I think that's a really great point about language, actually, in that so many words that we even used just a couple of years ago have kind of been, oh, I can't think of the correct word, but they've been spoiled, I guess, by, well, I won't say by what, but yeah, so we always used to, I think even personally, I find the term diversity representation has its issues now. I feel like it's been leapt on by many, many people, and it's kind of, been spoiled a little bit. And the same with positive, previously positive representation of disabilities was a great way to say that we need, books that do have positive representation, and like you say, that it's not necessarily upbeat, wonderful, but it's been kind of spoiled again. And I like to use the term inclusive and authentic, but I know in maybe 2-3 years' time, those words will not necessarily be the correct ones to use, because they'll be I guess spoiled by the way that they're used, and books stamped with these labels and these words that actually aren't at all. People come to trust them and they get abused, and so on and so forth. We saw it with Own Voices, the Own Voices hashtag. That was unfortunately spoiled as well. So I think that the topic of language is probably a whole separate topic to discuss when it comes to disability representation as well.
I think what you said about On Voices, and then I can let other people talk, but because this is kind of unrelated, but I did think what you said about On Voices was interesting, and like something that I want to be transparent about as someone who's like going through the submissions process with my agent, is that like I submitted a list for editors to look at of basically like all of my intersecting marginalizations that are relevant to the book. And so like I have my main character lives with chronic pain. The love interest has OCD. So I put in there, like, oh, I do have OCD. I do live with chronic pain. And for me, I didn't mind doing it. And again, I felt really comfortable with my agent because she's super protective of me, and she's also disabled. And she made it very clear that this is not something I have to do if I don't want to. But I do think we need to figure out some balance where we are getting disabled voices and also not forcing people to discuss marginalizations that they may not feel safe talking about or may not feel comfortable talking about. I disclosed in that as well that I'm bisexual, and that, you know, there are going to be people that aren't comfortable disclosing that they're queer. And so I do think that there are conversations happening about this that are really important. And I think, again, that having disabled voices and having people who are visibly disabled and who are openly disabled are super important. And at the same time, not forcing people to reveal their marginalization. So I think that both are important, and we need to kind of figure out where we go from here. So I'll be quiet now.
No, this is, you know, any one of these questions could honestly just be spun out into its own panel. I think that's just the nature of talking about one, fiction, and two, you know, disability representation. No matter what angle you approach it at, you're going to find, you know, like a rich vein full of ore of knowledge. That metaphor got away from me. But, you know, it's going to be a fruitful discussion. We've changed it to a tree. You know, no matter what branch you pull from on the Omni tree, you'll get a different delicious fruit each time. And discussing it is always worthwhile and always beneficial, because you'll always find that one person who this is the first time they're hearing it, and they'll come away from it with new knowledge. And speaking of knowledge, this question is one that I know usually comes up like when I'm doing sensitivity consulting, and just I think in general as authors. For disabilities that aren't visible, how do you show them without resolving to cliches or exposition?
I think that in the books that I mentioned before, I know I just said I would shut up, but I'm really excited about disability fiction. But the books that I mentioned before, One for All and Breathe and Count Back from 10, both do this very well, in that both are invisible disabilities. And also, I think the authors always, or not always, but often just name them, right? That it's, you know, that there is a name attached to this, whether it's cerebral palsy, like in Claire's books and Melissa's books, or hip dysplasia, like in Natalia's books, that the author said, like, no, this is what the person has. And that's not resolving to like, oh, this poor disabled, whatever, that's just like stating facts, I think is important. And then also in a case like Lily's, or in a case where it's a historical novel or a fantasy novel where maybe that kind of diagnosis doesn't exist yet, that we see how it feels in the body, or we see how the character's neurodivergence affects their thinking. And I think that is a really good way, just literally show us what's happening in their brain. Like in I think one author that does both of these really well is Sonoda Rise, who's the author of the Louis Ortega Survival Club, where the main character is autistic, and she's undiagnosed, but she's like, well, I don't need a diagnosis. Like this is what I have. And we just see the different ways that her autism impacts her thought process and impacts like her day-to-day, like how she interacts with other people. And the way that the way that we're watching, it's not necessarily like a good thing or a bad thing, it's a neutral thing, like we were talking about before. So I think that's a good way. And now I'm actually going to be quiet.
I think it kind of goes back to something too that we probably all heard from our editors at some point in time, showing, not telling. And instead of just coming out and saying, well, this character has XYZ, showing the symptoms, showing the emotions and how it affects their decision making and how it affects their process and how they feel about certain situations, the physical reactions that happen from some of these invisible disabilities, and being able to explain it in a way that isn't explicitly saying he had a panic attack, but giving the actual, you know, what's happening during the panic attack. How does he feel? What is his breath like? What does his heart feel like? And I think so. I think showing, not telling is, you know, maybe that does sound a little cliche, but I think it's also really important because a lot of people forget that, and it's it's something I struggled with whenever I first started out writing back a couple of years ago. And now that I've really grown as a writer and I've seen the difference that it makes in representing the disabilities, I actually rewrote my first novella as a full-length novel last year and did that a lot. I took out some of the places where I was telling about the disability and instead changed it to show the disability and give a better accurate representation of what it is.
I think that's, yeah, I agree with Tyler's like explanation and also with Nicole's, because I think that with invisible disabilities you have to show things in the novel in a certain way. And I'm thinking about my own novel to get a little self-indulgent, but my dissertation novel that I want to query is the two POV characters is one has cerebral palsy, so she has a visible disability, and she has hyperacusis, which is invisible. But then the other POV character has PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And what was really interesting for me in writing this novel, and it's adult contemporary fantasy, is that I wanted to showcase like how these two characters deal with their disabilities in like different ways. Like with my one character who has CP, she deals with how she deals with things and navigating with her wheelchair and navigating spaces, whereas with the other character, because he has invisible disabilities and PTSD, how he deals with his PTSD and like the mental health issues in a way that's not like stereotypical and where people wouldn't be like, disparaging towards him, or he's saying, I have nightmares a lot, or I have this that I'm going through. But like how these two characters kind of they meet and they come to understand each other despite they have different disabilities. But like when you show the invisible disability, it's more like what they are processing internally. And it's also very different because I'm also a screenwriter and I have the script adaptation of this. I wrote it as a script first, and you can't really show, it's different showing it on screen what someone is going through versus like how you show it in a book. So you can get more into their internal, what they're feeling and what they're going through and what a panic attack might look like, or what their invisible disabilities might look like internally. Like in a book you can show it more versus like on screen you have to be a lot more visual, and how like the camera cuts, and the writer as the screenwriter, you don't have to be responsible for the camera cuts, but like you can't show certain things. So it's a totally different process. And I think that that sometimes can be like when you're showing mental illness on a screen, the reason why it gets the rep is so bad is like they just don't do cuts right, or they show that it's like a villainous thing versus showing how someone lives with a mental illness and like their day to day and just how they go through their lives. So that's what I would think, that it's just shown differently, and we need to be more aware and more, I think, have more compassion for people with, especially different types of mental illnesses as well.
Well, you said
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry. No, you go, Nicole.
Oh no, I was just going to briefly say, what you said about screenwriting was really interesting, because I think a lot, I still, it lives rent free in my brain, still think a lot about Moon Knight, which I loved as a TV show and also as a depiction of disability. And a lot of folks with that same disability that the main character shares have talked about, the accuracy in that representation. And I do feel like part of it is that they spent so much time for a superhero show, but also for any show, like getting us into the main character's head. And they spent like essentially the entire first episode, there was nothing really sci-fi going on. It was just kind of like, this is what it's like to live with this character. And here are kind of like the things that he has to do regarding his disability and his mental health. And they kind of continue to do that with all the sci-fi. It's still very ingrained in character for a show that's very sci-fi and plot heavy.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think certainly, yeah, coming from that invisible disabilities point of view, that when I write my books, obviously looking back, I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult. It's been a few years now. But looking back at all the books I've written through my whole life, the representation has been for an autistic main character. Like, I cannot see the world, and I don't see the world, and I won't see the world any differently because I don't know how to. I don't know how to get inside a neurotypical person's head and see how they see the world. Like, even sitting here, and I've got in front of me all the questions. So when you ask the questions, Basil, I'm looking at them again and again and again and again because I need to understand fully what each word means, you know, process it in my head, answer the questions correctly. And is this what I have to go through all of those scenarios? So I think certain degree of how that looks on the page, it comes down to this authenticity. It comes down to this lived experience, like, you know, true, brilliant, wonderful, authentic representation is just naturally ingrained in the character's voice and the things that they do and the choices they make. It's multi-layered, and I personally don't know, you know, if you can teach that, if you can learn that as an author who doesn't share that disability. And I don't know, I think it's just again just another one of those branches with lots of lovely fruit on. Like, it's a whole topic and conversation, and sometimes I know when I'm writing, perhaps an experience my characters go through that I've shared at some point in my life, they may be cliche, and I don't know, or seen as cliche, I guess, maybe. So I think the only way that I ever deal with that is to flip maybe the cliche on its head, to actually openly, you know, confront it in the book and say, oh, you know, everybody will look at me and think, oh gosh, you know, typical autistic person. I guess that's the only way that sometimes cliche can be dealt with. Honestly, I don't know. I think so. I'm babbling a bit now. But yeah, I think certainly from my perspective, I couldn't write a book that is not from an autistic person's perspective, simply because that's all I know and that's all I do. So I hope that made sense.
That was an excellent point that you made, Kate. And as you were explaining, you know, your own perspective as an autistic person, I was just thinking about how I go through conversations where someone could be talking to me or texting me, and either way, I sort of see the text as like floating in front of them, like a role-playing game where there are highlighted sections, either like in italics or red, where it's like, this is the key information that I need. And then I select that, and then I need to pick a dialogue option that will match and also to some degree appease the person that I'm talking to so that it feels like a normal conversation. I will say one of the best things though is when you spend time with people that you know are either autistic and or neurodivergent, because then you could just skip all that. And you know, sometimes I have like the best conversations where it's like I'm talking to a friend and they say something and then I just reply with a cartoon quote and they just immediately get what I'm saying. But like if you're talking to someone who's like not neurodivergent or not autistic, they might be like, why did you just quote Scooby-Doo at me? And it's like, no, I'm agreeing with you, but like shorthand. And they're like, what? But so one of the things that I like is when I'm talking to a friend that is either neurodivergent and or autistic is, you know, you have a conversation where they'll say something and then I just respond with a cartoon quote and they just fully understand and the conversation keeps going. And then there are times when I'm talking to someone who might not be autistic, who might not be neurodivergent, and they're like, why did you just quote Scooby-Doo at me? And it's like, no, I'm agreeing with you, but with a quote, it's just shorthand, it's faster. And then they're like, well, why didn't you just say what this was? And I'm like, I did, but with fewer words. Or sometimes more words, but with more feeling. There's more emotion in that quote. And so as we reach the end of this panel, which has been so wonderful, and I hope all of our viewers and listeners, because I know there are plenty of people who listen to presentations and panels in podcast mode. Absolutely no shame, you know. I do plenty of things in podcast mode myself. This brings us to our final question, which is, why is disability representation important to you?
I do want to say for the folks listening in podcast mode that I am just wearing a really cute watermelon shirt, and that you should know about it even if you're not seeing it. So I just wanted to shout that out because it's new and I look cute. And also Free Palestine. But disability representation is important to me. I'm having a really hard time with this question just because I feel like it's so big, but I think that it all boils down to two things. One, that everyone deserves to see themselves represented in fiction. And two, that fiction encourages empathy, right? So like if people who don't have a disability are reading this fiction, it's okay not to be the main character sometimes. And it's okay to read things that are not about you, right? And that's why just diversifying your reading is so important, is to get in the head of someone with a different lived experience. So I think in both of those ways, that's why I think it's important.
Okay, so I'll continue. Yes, absolutely everything that you said, Nicole. Everybody deserves to see themselves in books, and it's important for everybody to read about everybody else, and everybody's different experiences. It's important to me for inclusive autistic representation because I'm autistic, because my son is autistic, because I now know so many beautiful autistic people around the world who are just continually misunderstood, not accepted, because there's a huge difference between acceptance and assimilation. And also, even this morning, I read an article, obviously over here in Australian schools, about the massive percentage of school suspensions being for disabled people, students, and a lot of those are students with invisible disabilities, who are pushed to meltdowns and to external behaviours because they have coped and coped and coped and survived until they just cannot anymore, and all people see is that behaviour. They don't stop and think, okay, so what led to that behaviour? What led to that moment, to that person being pushed to that limit? What happened previously? And I just think the books with this authentic representation of understanding experiences and day-to-day interactions from an autistic person's perspective in real time allows people to see, wow, they're processing an awful lot. The world's moved on, but they're still processing whatever it was that just happened, and they haven't been given a chance, etc., etc., etc. Again, it's a massive response that I could give you right now, but that's in a nutshell. Yeah, these news articles are just continuous daily, of how disabled people are just being ultimately abused, in my opinion, and it really needs to change fast.
Yeah, it's disability representation is important to me because I wasn't diagnosed with mental illness, my bipolar disorder, until I was out of college, and I wasn't diagnosed with PPD until about 6 months ago. So it's been quite the journey, and I know what it's like to feel alone. And I don't want other people to feel alone in their journey. I want them to feel like there's other people out there like them, that there's other people out there who have overcome their struggles or who are using their struggles to help others. And I really, for me, music saved my life whenever I was in high school. I didn't know what was wrong. Bands like Linkin Park and Pearl Jam, they spoke to me, and Nirvana especially. But they spoke to me on a new level that allowed me to understand myself better. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with my writing, was help other people understand themselves better too, because to me, that's where the disability representation comes into play. It's more authentic. It allows people to see that they're not alone in this world. And that's something that's so important to me because, like I said, I went through being alone for the first over 20 years of my life, and it's a scary feeling. I almost didn't make it out alive, and I want to save lives and make sure people are, they know that they're valued and their life is precious.
Congrats on your diagnosis.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. That's amazing. It's a big thing to get a diagnosis too. I just got a bad diagnosis also in February. They're like, yeah, you're autistic. And I was like, well, I was like, yeah, okay, like that makes sense. So I think disability representation is important to me because I mean, I'm gonna give a bit of the cliche answer along with what Nicole said about like growing up and like not seeing yourself represented and stuff in TV and film and books. But also like when I started writing disabled characters, it was in fanfic. It wasn't very popular fanfic, but if you know what the show True Calling is, that was the love of my life. And I wrote a disabled character in that to like my own character. And then I realized that like I could write characters. Like I didn't have to write it just in fanfic. I could write it outside of fanfic. So I could write it in scripts and in stories and like it's needed because I would get these feedback from like online friends saying like, oh, I didn't know like that much about cerebral palsy or about disability awareness. And like that really encouraged me to like to write more about my experiences, not just with CP, with other disabilities too, but to write more about my experiences like on a bigger scale outside of fanfic, so original fiction and screenplays and stuff like that, and to write more about my authentic experience. But for me, it did start in fanfic, even though I had written some original stuff before. And I think just, educating people and, I teach, workshops on writing disabled characters and um, just like educating other people about, even if you are disabled, about how to use like a disability studies methodology to write disabled characters and how to incorporate your own point of view into that. And that's why it's important to me because I want other writers to feel, other people who are readers, but also other writers to feel like they are empowered. Kind of like what Tyler said too, is I want them to feel like they are empowered, that they have a voice. And then if you're not part of that community, that you can still like have access to that experiences, even if you don't relate to it, but that you could find some common ground with it as well, or just enjoy the story and go on the ride with the characters, but you come out with an understanding of what those characters have gone through. So that's what I would say, why it's important. Because it teaches, it, like Nicole said, it teaches empathy. So
The more disabled books out there, I think the more we're winning. So for sure.
And just to say more because I haven't heard my voice enough today. I think that beyond this conversation, we need to be focusing an awful lot more on the right representation. There's still too many books being published, particularly, as I say, from an autistic perspective, where autism is not represented well at all. And these are recently published books coming out where the autistic characters have superpowers because of their traits. Their traits are their superpowers. That's, to me, that's just not listening to the community and what the community want, what the community need. I don't want to see any more books being studied in schools which have, a scene from a sibling's perspective, where their brother who is autistic is a burden and, ruining their life. And I just don't want it anymore. And the problem is, again, it goes up right to the top. These books are still being acquired, they're still being published, they're still being looked at from this neurotypical, non-disabled perspective. Oh gosh, isn't that wonderful, inspiring? Let's know. So I think, yeah, a lot more focus needs to be put on the right books being published with disabled representation and not just any old book.
Absolutely. And each of the answers that the four of you gave just really underscores the importance of disability representation. As you were saying, Tyler, like I remember as a kid, the few times like I would find a book that would have like a disabled character, or being a 90s kid, finding like a Black character actually going out and doing things and not being the sidekick. And it would just be so exciting to just go run, take that book from the library shelf and kind of, because I was a very short kid, hop up so that the librarian could see me so I could check out the book. Uh, but this has just been a phenomenal panel. I have had a wonderful experience being here with all of you. And as we close out this panel, I just want to take this moment to go back around, and each of you can, again, just share your name and also share where they can find you, whether that's a website or social media, and any calls to action you may have. I also want to reiterate what Nicole was saying, Free Palestine, and also that your shirt is amazing. I don't have a watermelon
Thank
shirt. I
you.
have this fruity button-up shirt from Curl Lines. Nope. No, it's got ice pops. I'm thinking of, okay. Anyway, the point is fruit are great, and so are watermelon and Free Palestine. So we'll go Kate, then Nicole, then Tyler, and then Lara, and we'll close things out. So Kate.
So I have a t-shirt with just to basically show how much of a boring, aggressive grammar nerd I am. So apologies, but no apologies. And I love the watermelons and etc. So I'm Kate Foster. You can find me on katefosterbooks.com and Kate Foster Author on Instagram and Twitter. My books, my first book was published with Candlewick over in the US last year. All the Small Wonderful Things. Harriet Hound will follow later this year, and then The Unlikely Heroes Club next year. I think that please listen to the community would be the one thing I want to tell, push and spread. Listen to autistic voices, neurodivergent voices, disabled voices, please. We need to be part of our conversation.
Hey y'all, I'm Nicole. My name is right there. I'm Nicole Zelniker on Instagram and Threads. I have left the Bird app, but I have adopted Threads instead, and I can be on TikTok, or I am on TikTok until they ban the app. Nicole Writes Books. So I would love to see y'all there. I would say in terms of like a call to action, to read more disabled books, but especially read more disabled books by disabled authors of color, because the experiences that different folks have with different intersecting marginalized identities, it's all very different. And like what Kate was saying before about folks getting in trouble at school, that's doubly true for Black and Brown kids. So something more is coming out this summer about a girl, the main character is autistic. Books by Erin Estevez, books by Mariama Lockington. It's nearing the end of the panel. It's nearing my bedtime, y'all. I have chronic fatigue. But definitely, when you're searching for disabled books, make sure you're also reading diversely within that.
So I am Tyler Wittkofsky. You can find me online at tylerwittkofsky.com or at Tyler Wittkofsky on pretty much all major social media platforms. The best way to find all of my books, all of my businesses, everything would be my link tree, which is linktr.ee/Tyler Wittkofsky. And I would say, one thing I want to leave people with is that I said this earlier, but I think it's worth repeating is don't forget you are capable of more than your mental illness says you are, or your disability says you are, because we are so capable of achieving greatness and achieving success that we need to remember that, because we are just as valuable as anybody else, and we deserve to be loved. We deserve to be treated with respect, and never forget to always treat those who have disabilities with the same respect that you would somebody who doesn't have a disability.
My name is Lara Ameen. You can find me on, I guess it's X now, X and Instagram and TikTok. It's at True Cherry Girl, TRU Cherry Girl, because I am a cherry girl. And I keep them blocked, but if you want to follow me, just you can request, and I like to follow back other writers, but I keep it blocked for reasons because I have been harassed before by people I know, which is worse than by strangers somehow. So I would say I don't really have calls to action, but I would say I want to echo what Nicole said about, making sure you read and support disabled people and disabled people of color and their books and shows and stuff. Hey, someday hopefully maybe I'll have a show out someday, maybe. Would love to do that. But I also want to, I will promote that I am teaching a class on writing disabled characters in fiction with women on writing, and I'm teaching it in the fall. It should be out when this panel gets posted. It's going to be in October, I believe, and it's a 6-week workshop on writing disabled characters. The texts we'll be using is One for All by Lily Lainoff and Where You See Yourself by Claire Forrest. And I really encourage, if you are a disabled writer, to come and sign up, and we'll have some fun. This is my first time teaching like a longer workshop. I've only done like shorter ones, so this is the first time, and I'd love to get some traction and have people sign up. It's going to be really fun, and I just, want to keep the conversation going about disability representation in fiction and in media. So hope that will interest some people to sign up. And it's also like going to be, the representation is going to be with YA novels, mostly like in genre fiction. So thank you.
Okay, this has been disability representation in fiction. Again, I've been your moderator, Basil. These have been our lovely panelists. And if you are watching this live, by the time this video concludes, you can start asking your questions in the dedicated channel in the Discord server, the WriteHive conference Discord server. If you're watching this after the fact, you'll have to reach out to the panelists if you have any questions you want to ask them. But thank you so much for being here. Bye, everyone. We'll see you in the chat, hopefully.